Well, hello there. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Highside, Lowside. I am your host, Spurgeon Dunbar, and of course, I'm always joined by Mr. Zachary Quartz. Zach, how you doing today?
Splendid. Thank you. Tell the ladies and gentlemen what we got coming down the pipe here, huh?
Well, we've got, as always, a t-shirt winner. We've got some exciting news. Zach and I have both recently ridden a slew of new motorcycles, and I'm sure we'll chat about that briefly. Our guest today is one and only Mr. Ari Henning. He is going to be joining us as we talk about imposter motorcycles. Now, what do we mean by this? We mean bikes that look like something, but they might not deliver on their looks. We're going to get into that a little bit more as we walk through the main portion of this podcast, and we're going to talk, as always, some viewer and listener comments at the end to round things out. But before we do that, we should probably talk about our sponsor, Motul.
I feel like you told me you had a great segue for the initial Motul conversation.
Yeah, I was going to say, hey, Zach, what do we talk about now? But I was really afraid that you were going to say T-shirt winners like you have done in 2 of the episodes so far. So I figured I would lead us right into it by saying, let's talk about Motul.
Right. And the segue this time, people, for those of you, those of you not watching on the YouTubes, Spurgeon just popped a can of what I can only assume is IPA at 1 p.m. Or no, it looks like
it's a
water.
Pilsner, and it's afternoon here. And this is my Motul koozie. It's got a vintage can of Motul on it, and it says "Change Your Oil." And for
Good
those
advice.
of you that were at Get On Adventure Fest with us, you know that not only did Motul hook us up with a bunch of free chain cleaner and off-road lube to make sure that everybody's chain was clean and lubed up, but they were also there themselves passing out koozies that say "Change Your Oil" on it with a little picture of a vintage can of Motul oil.
I didn't take a koozie, in part because I spent most of Get On Adventure Fest on a BMW R1250 GS and therefore did not lube my chain or clean the chain.
Yeah, but you also have hands of steel, and they don't get cold. So all those ice-cold beers you were slugging down, compliments of Fast House and 805 Brewing, you were impervious to it. So for those of you that actually didn't catch the photo, Zach and I were guest bartenders for a while at Get On Adventure Fest as well.
A pretty bad idea, but in the end it worked out just fine.
A lot of people got free beer to put in their Motul koozies.
That is true. So if you would like free beer, you should come to Get On Adventure Fest, among other reasons. Anyway,
if you want a Motul koozie, you should come to Get On Adventure Fest.
That as well. Tip of the cap to Motul for sponsoring Highside, Lowside, as always, and for coming to Get On Adventure Fest and providing chain cleaning and lubricating tools for everyone. Not to mention koozies.
Yeah, I mean, most importantly, thank you for hiding my adult beverage so I can drink in the morning and not feel that guilty about it.
Hopefully HR doesn't listen to the podcast. I'm sure they don't.
They have better things to do with their time.
So do we give away a T-shirt now? Is that how this works?
Now, we are going to flip our scripts, if you will. If you're following along with us in the visual side of things, we're turning the page as we talk about the Apple Podcast review section, where if you leave us an Apple Podcast review, one, it helps other people find the show. It does wonders for Zach and myself as far as our self-esteem goes by reading all the kind reviews. And the winner today is New Mom to Baby B. And Zach, why don't you tell us what old New Mom to Baby B has to say?
And I quote, "I've only been riding a little over a year, but I've just fallen in love with motorcycling. It's nice to have a podcast that talks bikes and acknowledges that women ride too. Every little bit to encourage more women to ride helps, in my opinion. I'd love to have more women/small rider-centric content, but I'll take what I can get. Thanks, guys." So I appreciate this review because it basically said, thanks for doing what you do, but hey, don't forget to don't dial it back.
Yeah,
like more, new rider, small rider centric, or female rider centric content is welcome. So Your message received.
I like this one too because my girlfriend recently took a all-women's off-road riding course, and she recently acquired her first motorcycle ever. So I think it speaks volumes to a lot of the women in the audience to know that there are a lot of new programs and riding courses really focused on women first and women centric, and it's great to see even in my household the effects that has, because now I don't have to go out and ride alone on the weekends. I have somebody to go ride with.
Does your girlfriend listen to Highside, Lowside?
No. I mean, when I make her, when I'm like, hey, we're going to review this 2-hour-long episode where Zach and I just talk at each other, and then she finds it entertaining, like she laughs. So I would say that she probably listens to half of the episodes that we release based on what I force her to listen to.
Right. So she enjoys it in kind of a way where the look behind her eyes is something like, what am I going to tell my parents that he does, because I can't say this.
Yeah, because I mean, there's got to be some reason that she's with me, other than the fact that I'm barely gainfully employed. So anyway, if you've got a review for us, let's leave it there. If you've got a review for us, you can always head over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a review, and Zach and I will make sure to send you a free shirt. So if you are to Mom to Baby B, make sure you send us your address and your T-shirt size to Highside@RevZilla.com, and we will hook you up with a free T-shirt.
For the record, my instinct is still to give away the T-shirt right off the bat, and I'm considering putting it to the team in the next meeting. Should we just flip it? Should we just do the T-shirt first and then do the Motul thing after? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. Maybe my instinct is right.
Maybe what we do is for season 6, which is almost upon us, folks, because this is the 10th episode of season 5. Maybe we work with Motul, and Motul sponsors the T-shirt giveaway. My gosh, could you? You're mind blown. So instead of koozies, you get a Highside Lowside T-shirt, and Motul just presents it. That would also save us probably about $135 a season in free T-shirts that we've been giving away.
More to the point, it's actually time to talk about the news now, and mostly what we would like to get across is a bunch of plugs for Common Tread. All the articles about new bikes that have been ridden by the team, and to name a few, you got your Ducati Desert X, which Spurgeon just reviewed. You got your Triumph Speed Triple 1200 RR, which Jen just reviewed. You got your Harley-Davidson Nightster. That's a new Harley-Davidson power plant that Andy reviewed. You got your Gixxus 1000 GT Plus that Lance reviewed. And you got your Kawasaki Z650 RS that Andy reviewed as well.
And the other one that's not on here too. And as much as this is a plug for Common Tread, it's also a plug for all the OEMs that are really loading us up on new motorcycles right now. The one that's not on here that you just reviewed was the Triumph 1200, which wasn't that long ago.
I suppose, yeah. I didn't want to talk about that. Anyway, whatever. Yeah, there's another review on there. True enough. Yeah. So yeah, lots of fresh bike reviews on Common Tread where you can read all about the latest and greatest hot metal from all your favorite brands.
And what I will say too, the one that's not on this list, but I know is upcoming, is we got an invitation to go ride the Stark Varg. And that is so two things there. One, during our conversations with MIPS the other day, because we were having a conversation with MIPS that's going to tie into the finale episode, which is only 2 episodes away. Not going to give that away just yet. But in the course of the conversation, it turns out that there's a connection to the CEO, the owner, founder of Stark Varg. So one of the conversations we had was seeing if he'd be interested in coming on and maybe doing a little 15-minute spot in the podcast to talk about the motorcycle and really where that technology comes from. So we'll see how that all plays out. But if nothing else, on Common Tread in the next couple of weeks, you will be able to read a first ride review of the new Stark Varg electric dirt bike.
Is that happening in May? I thought that was... I thought it was later. I thought it was in
May or June? It's like a few weeks away. But knowing that this episode isn't going to release for at least 2 weeks,
you all should be going to Common Tread all the time anyway. Yeah. So the last bit of Common Tread content regarding motorcycles that we are riding as a part of the team, you might notice that we did not mention Ari Henning in any of those bike reviews. One of the reasons is that he's focused on a pretty nifty project whereby Yoshimura is building a fully race prepped and kitted R7 from Yamaha to race in the Moto America Twins Cup. And none other than Ari Henning is taking the helm of that article to talk about the behind the scenes and taking the actual helm of the actual motorcycle and actually racing it.
How
so we
cool
wanted to
is
bring
that?
him in to talk about that.
They are going to bring our own lovable Ari Henning out onto a racetrack and allow him to ride in the Moto America Series. I think it's extremely impressive.
So to get slightly more information on that, let's bring Ariel in here and talk about it.
Ari, as always, welcome to the program. How are you doing today?
Doing all right. Glad to be back. You guys have been real busy cranking out the podcasts.
Yeah, we try to, but what I will say is that we're happy to have you here now to share the load. So
I'll do my best.
So we were just talking about the Yosh project and how Yoshimura is building an R7 and they're going to go racing, and you get to take the helm of that article and go behind the scenes, and you get to actually ride the bike. So what's the status as of right now to get everyone up to date?
Status is we have done one track test, which was quite successful. I watched those guys tear the bike down to almost the frame in between every session, which was remarkable. And we've got another session scheduled for next Sunday, and I'm actually going into the R&D shop tomorrow on Saturday to help them get the bike prep for that. So they're on the gas, working on it as much as time allows, and it's coming together nicely.
What's it been like for you? I mean, you've got a long history of racing and attending track days. You know, what's it been like for you to work with a professional team like Yoshimura versus when you just go to the track with your toolbox in tow?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly difficult for me to not be more involved. I'm used to being a one-man team where I do all the wrenching myself, but in this case, I pull in and someone actually catches the bike and I step off of it and then they just take over. And there is nothing I can do to contribute. Like, the chassis guy might come over and ask some questions about the suspension or the gearing or whatever, but they're busy. They have their protocol. So it's very different to be just a rider. And thankfully, in the broader scope of the project, I'm much more than that. They're allowing me to be much more involved and kind of pulling the curtain back to see how the process works. But at the track thus far, they have their silos of responsibility very clearly demarcated, and mine is simply to ride the motorcycle.
So now this bike is going to be raced at Laguna Seca. So you're a few months out from the race. How are you feeling as far as your preparation goes to be able to, bring home the gold?
Rusty. I have, similar to Yoshimura, not racing since 2019. I haven't raced since like 2017 when I bought a house. So, they might be basing their expectation of my performance on outdated race results in a much less competitive class. So they do seem to be aware of that. I've kind of brought that up to them that I might not be the ideal rider if they're looking for a podium finish, but they seem to have faith in my abilities. So I'll try not to disappoint them.
Well, that's awesome. Is there, and now just so those of us listening can follow along, there's going to be a Common Tread article about your race as well as the bike, correct?
Yeah, so we already have one Common Tread article that went up just kind of introducing the project and giving people some context and background. I'm working on another one based on the testing we've done so far where we'll introduce the team, because there's a lot of really interesting personalities and backgrounds as part of this project, and give people an idea of what's going on with the bike, because there's a lot of curiosity about the parts that are being developed, because Yoshimura is basically designing and prototyping their own stuff for a lot of this. And then, the race in July. So at least 3 articles. And then Yoshimura's already produced one video introducing the project, and they've been recording the whole time throughout the bike build and the testing and the race. They're going to have their own video about that. And then we're hoping to get the bike here on the TSM lift to do kind of a walk around and give people a thorough rundown of how this bike differs from a stock R7 and why it is going to be so much faster.
That's awesome. So for those of you listening, if you want to check out the first article that Ari put together, it's entitled Yoshimura is building a YZF R7 and we're going to race it. You can find that over on Common Tread right now, and we look forward to seeing the other articles as they unfold.
So the segue here is that bike will look fast and actually be fast. Unlike some of the machines that we're going to talk about today, some of which might not look fast but be fast, or might look like they can go over jumps but cannot, so on and so forth. And I should say that we credit where credit's due. We got an email from someone named Emil Sundqvist from Stockholm, Sweden, and the email basically said, I'm going to paraphrase, it sort of says what scramblers are actually good off-road and which ones are not, which is a good question. And it sort of got us thinking, like, yeah, what bikes look like they're good at something but aren't? And I think we've kept a lot of our brainstorming private, so as not to have the podcast in the lead up discussion too much. But yeah, I'm excited to dive into this one because I feel like there are a lot of candidates here. And I don't know.
Just two clarifying points to what Zach just said. So clarifying point number one is when we kept it secret, the three of us have separate lists. So we didn't keep it secret from like our producer or whatnot, but like we don't know what the other person is going to say. Right. And then the second point is that we're not limiting this to just scramblers. That was the inspiration for the episode, but we've got something for cruisers and sport bikes and adventure bikes and the whole kit and caboodle, if you will.
So actually, normally, we go guest honors for first bike, but I'd like to kick this one off by proposing the YZF R7. Do you think that bike is kind of an imposter in itself in stock form because it looks so racy, and then it's like
it looks exactly like an R6. That was the idea, right? And yet it's this parallel twin that's got all this low end torque that's great for the street, but as a sport bike, I mean, you and I have both ridden it in stock form at the track, and like it's fun, but compared to what it looks like, what it's supposed to look like, it's just so anemic, and the suspension's terrible, and it runs out of steam above 7,000 RPM. So I think it gives people the looks they want as a sport bike, and it is a very functional street bike, but it is purporting to be a little more athletic than it actually is, a lot more athletic than it actually is.
Right. Well, so that being said, I guess I would turn to you, Ari, and say, do you have a bike that really stands out to you at the top of your list? I have
a question. Actually.
Okay, Spurgeon's got a question. Sorry, I was going to start the podcast.
Before
question from the peanut gallery.
Before you move on, I have a question relating to what the comment was just on the R7. Before we move on from that, so
fair enough.
Because you had talked about it's kind of a sheep in wolf's clothing, if you will. But like I see the R7 more. Could it not be something that's maybe more of a track bike for people that don't know what an R6 performance is? Maybe somebody that's getting started that might actually
if you're a C or B level track day rider, you're going to have an absolute hoot on that thing, and you're probably going to go faster and be more comfortable than you ever would on an R6 because R6s are so much harder to ride. But just in terms of like what the bar that has been set by the aesthetic that they are utilizing and even the nomenclature of the bike model is not quite matched up by the performance of the actual machine. But that's fine. It's a great motorcycle. I love the R7.
Cool.
Yeah, that's a good summary. It's a hoot on a track. It's just it's not a weapon really. It's like
well said.
It's a more of a training tool.
And I think that ties into some of the bikes that we're going to talk about today, right? Like some of the bikes we're going to talk about are lovable motorcycles that we like for other reasons, but they just might not do exactly what you think they're going to do based on how they look.
So, Ari, do you have a standout? Like was there one bike where you thought like, oh man, I can't wait to talk about?
I wasn't particularly excited about it, and frankly, I think it's a strong example, but it's probably not the direction you guys had anticipated. But if we harken back to the CTXP episode of Dave the Gixxer versus the 2020 Panigale V4S, that is a motorcycle that is touted as one of the most powerful and sophisticated sport bikes available for purchase, and yet it got its ass handed to it by a 20-year-old GSXR because it has all this technology, it has all this performance, but they tried to straddle two worlds, right? They tried to straddle street bike comfort with softly tuned suspension while also having world-beating 200 horsepower, which you cannot funnel through a soft shock spring and still try and go around a racetrack quickly, as we learned in that episode.
For people that are not familiar with the episode,
how could they not be familiar with that episode?
Well, I would hope that they go back and watch it after listening to this because that's a great reference. But can you give us a synopsis of what that episode was about and what the results were?
First, I want to give a synopsis of my impression of Highside, Lowside listeners, which is that they love you guys and they love everything you do. So I am very confident that if they're listening to the show and if they're dedicating the time to it, they have seen the CTXP episode. But if they haven't, if there's something wrong with their internet or whatever, that was when Zach and I took what many believe to be the high water mark for superbikes, the K5, the 2005 Suzuki GSXR. So that's before emissions really started kicking in, before electronics started making things heavier and complicated. Just a very simple, competent sport bike. And we compared it to, at the time, the latest and greatest, which was the 2020 Ducati V4S, which has all the bells and whistles you could possibly imagine. And we compared them on the street and on the racetrack. And most surprisingly was the performance on the racetrack where the old Haggard clapped out, what did it have, like 55,000 miles on the clock?
More. Yeah,
it had 55,000
miles. It had 55,000 miles on the clock, and the odometer was
odometer
broken.
didn't work. Yeah, the
so
speedometer and odometer didn't work.
it had given up at 55,000 miles, but we don't know what it's actually at.
But the old Haggard bike, which we did rebuild the brakes and the suspension stuff because they were old and high mileage, it just went significantly faster than the Ducati consistently with both Zach and I on it, and regardless of what tires we put on it, it was just it in that particular test at that particular track, it was just faster.
And we did one of my favorite comments was, yeah, but you were probably like, part of why you didn't go as fast on the Ducati was like you were more afraid to crash it. Yeah. And Ari and I have consistently said, yeah, wouldn't you be if you spent like if you had a K5 Gixxer that you bought for $4,500 or $3,500 and then put some parts on, like, wouldn't you be more willing to crash that bike? And isn't that kind of the point?
But at the same time, I like to think that you and I have the experience and skill where we can ride a $20,000 or $25,000 or $100,000 in the case of the Superleggera bike at a pace that actually reveals what it's capable of without crashing.
We ought to be able to do that. Gosh darn it. Correct. Well, that's interesting. I mean, that bike is not on my list because it is, whatever. It was underwhelming during that video for sure. But in general, it's it'll blow your hair back.
If you're in a straight line and you twist the throttle. Yeah, agreed. I know. Right. I don't think it was necessarily a prime example, but it was the first thing that bubbled to the top of my mind when I'm like, everyone expects this to be so much faster than the old sport bike, but it wasn't what it ended up being.
So, true. So then, if that's not what was on your list, Zach, what's one that's on the top of your list to kick things off?
Literally at the top of my list, and I think that this is going to be on your list too, Spurge. So you sure you want me to go? Because I may be picking one from your list as well.
No, just go ahead. Let's talk about the V-Strom now and get it out of the way.
I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not a V-Strom hater. The bike literally at the top of my list because it was the first one that came to mind, and it goes back to Emil's question about scramblers that are good off-road and scramblers that are not good off-road is the Yamaha SCR 950, which if you don't recall, Yamaha came out with the Star Bolt, which was basically a Harley Sportster kind of knockoff thing, cruiser, 950cc, I believe, air-cooled V-twin, and in general, a pretty good bike for what it was.
As a cruiser, that was a great bike.
Yeah. And then for some reason, Yamaha decided to doctor it up as a sort of a scrambler.
And by doctor it up, they put a flat seat on it and some knobby tires. And then they're like, got a new bike, guys.
Have fun.
Come check it out.
Yeah. And I thought that was a very strange thing to do. And to be fair, there's a whole conversation we could have about how people take actual Sportsters and turn them into actual dirt bikes. And that is sort of hilarious and awesome in its own way. But this really felt like not a cultural exploration, but a kind of a half-hearted stab at a bizarre thing. And the suspension was
non-existent.
It is so far off base.
And there's a marketing move, right? That was for the showroom. So people would be like, oh, it's a scrambler. It's got that look I want.
Yeah, but even like it hardly even looked right. Agreed. It was all like dumpy and low at the back, and it just so strange.
It was definitely interesting. What I will say, so first of all, when we talk about the suspension, it had like 3 inches of suspension travel out back. And I was at that press launch where Yamaha took us down to San Diego, and they had us riding.
You did the SCR 950 press launch?
Oh yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yep. And they took us down to like this desert off-road riding area for the portion of the test, and it was comical because it was like this real clapped out dirt road, and people were in pain because like you'd go over bumps, and there was like it was just bottoming out, and they were kind of surprised because like a lot of us in the review were like, it's not really good off-road, and they're like, well, it's not really intended to be, and I'm like, then why did you take us there? What were you thinking? What I will say in the scrambler, in the SCR 950's defense, it is not a scrambler. It is definitely an imposter in that regard, but it was a fun little around town bike, and considering dealerships were knocking like a third of the price off the MSRP to move them off of showroom floors. It was a fun little bike to get if you just wanted something to bop around town or hit a backcountry road on the weekends. It was a fun bike. It just didn't live up to the expectations that I think they were trying to market towards.
Right. And I think like Ari sort of implied earlier, like the core of the bike was fine. It was just so far removed from what it was supposed to be as a quote-unquote scrambler that just didn't work.
The suggested application was off base. That's what it was.
So
But
there's
they're on the flip side, which I assume is where you're going. There's some bikes in this category now that actually work pretty damn well.
yeah. Well, take us there. Well, actually, I suppose if we're being honest here, it's Spurgeon's turn to.
No, we can. We can come back. I think we could talk. I think no, we could because I got some other ones that kind of vary away from the scrambler. But I think, if we're talking about specifically scramblers, there's some that look cool, but you really wouldn't want to take off road. And I think the BMW R9T scrambler comes to mind.
Oh my god!
Oh yeah,
that bike was not fun off road.
I tried.
Oh, I tried. I cracked a rim. BMW for the press launch for that one. I think Zach, you were on that with me in New Jersey.
Yeah, we were
right?
on that together. Yeah.
And they took us down this dirt road, and they were flying. Like our leader was like turning up the heat, and I was like, okay, let's do it. And we had the versions with I was on a version with the mag wheels, and I mean I cracked a rim pretty good, and I just handed the bike back.
BMW wheels are very malleable, they have been for ages, evidently. Zach and I, one of us, I don't actually remember who it was, but dented our boss's S1000 XR rims going off road. But yeah, that was the press launch where the fella like really sent it, right? He like wheeled over backwards, and Kevin Wing got a photo.
He sent it all right.
Yeah,
that's right.
And like his phone, and he's like all twisted in midair, and like his phone's flying off in one direction, his wallet in another, and like
I mean, chucked that bike into a ditch at like 40 or 50 miles an hour, and I think broke the swing arm off, didn't it?
The swing arm was the bike was sideways because I was right after him in that photo pass.
Oh, were you?
And I remember coming up and seeing the bike laying on the side of the road, and I was like, because Kevin Wing was the photographer, and I remember thinking to myself, oh man, like Kevin's bike must have fallen off the kickstand. I wonder if he knows that.
It must have fallen off the kickstand and then put the rear wheel on sideways.
But the best part about that launch, and I don't want to get too far off topic here, but we all came down for dinner that night, and Kevin Wing had made a slideshow of the bike, just as Zach would put it, mouse trapping itself backwards.
And sure,
he put it up on a big projector. Oh no, they took the photos down. Like
I bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're still out there on the internet though. For those who want to look it up, just look up BMW Scrambler wheelie over backwards or something along those lines.
The really to put a finer point on it, and to get back to Emil's original question and email, the really sad thing about the R9T Scrambler, I think, is that the R9T came out in whatever that was, 2014 or 15 or something like that. Yeah, and it was a sort of like a sort of a cafe'd. Old previous generation R1200 boxer engine, and had a round headlight and sort of like basic cafe treatment. And honestly, that bike is great. It's
super
really
fun.
Good bike to ride around it. Like the engine works well, the suspension
as a street bike,
handles well
as a cafe
bike.
racer.
Yeah. And then there came after all those spin-offs, the R9T Racer, the R9T Scrambler, the R9T Pure, and all of those bikes used lower spec suspension, lower spec brakes. They were all kind of dumbed down, and it makes me wonder if they. I know the R9T Scrambler is a bit of a cursed idea from the beginning because it's not really. It has the same problem that the SCR 950 has. It's not made for that application. It doesn't. Yeah, it's more of an aesthetic exercise. But if it had just had that nice upside down Sachs fork or whatever it was that was on the original R9T, and I don't know, like if they like lengthened it a little bit or something like that, like that suspension was good.
Those stock tires, though, do you remember those?
Oh,
like those should have never been produced.
That's
when you
true.
ride them on the street, you feel like you're gonna fall down. I remember just leaving the parking lot and like putting a foot out when I turned because I thought the front was washing. It was just the way the front behaved.
Yeah. Do you remember were they Metzler Carews?
Metzler something. Yeah, I think they were Carews. And the block pattern, it had like an edge that you would fall off of, and it just felt just like the front was gonna tuck.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't the engine different too? Wasn't the original Pure the liquid-cooled heads, and then the ones that came afterwards weren't?
Nope. They were all the pre-gen
they were all,
dry clutch oil heads because they had just come out with the Watser Boxer, which was in the GS, and then they kind of started using that in the other models. And it was a great application because that engine is so mechanical and it smells like hot oil, and it just worked really well for that style.
But it's always curious to me that they came, that they had the original R9T, which I still love to this day. I think it's a fabulous motorcycle, and then like the R9T Racer is like supposed to be like the cafe racer one, and it has like the little bikini fairing, and it's all racery, and it has like the fork on it.
And then the ergos are terrible too.
And the ergos are miserable on the Racer. And then the Scrambler has, knobby tires, and then has the fork on it, and like just worse suspension. And it's so funny that the bike that the original concept was the one that was actually good. It's the one that's probably the best at doing any and all of the things that you want to do, whether it's pretend to be a racer or pretend to be a scrambler. It
wasn't just that the fork was bad; they also raked the hell out of it. So like it was hard.
That's true,
It was really weird to steer the bike. It wasn't as it was very long. It was very not nimble.
Right.
It's also those bikes also mark a point in BMW's BMW's timeline where it had previously spent 7 or 8 decades building things that are extremely capable, regardless of what they looked like. And then suddenly they took this left turn and started making stuff that didn't work well. And I remember Zach and I scratching our head being like, they made this a worse motorcycle for the sake of styling. And unfortunately, they've continued to do that. There's the R18 that I know this is way off topic, but like when we tested that bike, we're like, they literally just made it worse. They made a motorcycle that like could have been good, and they just made it worse in order to look and I guess feel a certain way.
Well, I think the R18 is on topic for the episode, right? Like they were trying to go after something from an aesthetic standpoint that doesn't even necessarily deliver on what that is.
I mean, well, arguably it does. Like they tried to build a BMW Harley Davidson, kind of.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
they said they were trying to build a lowrider S, and then we wrote it Softail. We wrote it back to back with the Softail, and it did nothing better.
Right.
Yeah, and that was where, like, when we had Lance on the program, he said that the newer versions of the R18, like is it the Transcontinental?
The bigger touring one.
Like the touring ones.
He said that actually makes a little bit more sense than what the original one was the kind of argument that he was making. But the original one, it's interesting because like right now, like you can't find motorcycles to buy except for there's a ton of R18s left over on showroom floors that are heavily discounted, much like even the SCR 950s.
Yeah, right. Even the BMW press fleet, occasionally we email. It was like, hey, do you guys have any bikes around? And like, we got lots of R18s.
We got lots of R18s. No, we're good. It takes up way too much space in our shop.
Right. So you sounded like you were going to pivot, Ari. A few minutes ago, you were like, but then again, there are some bikes in this category that are quite good.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, kind of carrying on with that scrambler conversation. I think. I don't know if that's the direction you were going to go, but there were certain scramblers specifically that I think kind of run that category.
For those of you that can't see me, I am nodding. Yeah, there's a scrambler. There's a scrambler that I think we're all thinking about, so I'm just going to say it. The Triumph 1200 Scrambler XE.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the one we used for the Christmas tree episode, and that was I think our first experience on it. But holy, that is a great bike.
Yeah, and we just had one with us like Get on Adventure Fest, and that was what.
Canary was romping it for ages, and like it's got just baller suspension and tons of travel, and the engine's great, and it's got the electronics package where you can turn off your ABS, and it's got really lenient traction control. I mean, it looks the part. It looks absolutely badass and beautiful, and then you can ride the wheels off of it and not really have any limitations, except I think it was steering lock, right? Wasn't that a problem?
Yeah, for the Christmas tree episode, we ended up riding it with an Africa Twin, and we rode it up this crazy switchback single track thing, and I had to because I don't know, it's like too heavy or I'm not a good enough rider or whatever the excuse is. I had to do like 3-point turns to get through the hairpins because it's got like a 65-inch wheelbase and not enough steering lock because it's so long and tall and heavy. I mean, it is just a massive motorcycle. But we did boost it off some jumps, and I mean, truthfully, it kept pace with an Africa Twin 1100 off-road. I mean, there was nothing that the Africa Twin did that the Scrambler couldn't do, which is, at the end of the day, it's arguably, based on the size of it, it's arguably an adventure touring bike and not like a dirt bike, but still impressive off-road and pretty cool that Triumph did that.
Like even when we were at Get on Adventure Fest, for those of you that aren't exactly sure what we're talking about here, but we went out on like this little advanced ride on the end, like after we were kind of done with the work, where Zach and Ari and myself, and then Jeff and some other folks, and Jeff works with us here at RevZilla. We all went out and we just were like, we had one last day where we had no responsibility and we just had fun, and he was right there with us, and we were all on a variety of adventure bikes, and that Scrambler, man, ripped right across the desert with the best of everything else out there.
Holds its own for sure.
And I appreciate that. I think that's the bike from Spurgeon, we mentioned this earlier, so hopefully I don't jump in the gun, but that's from the James Bond movie, where the most recent Bond, where he blasts up that staircase in Morocco and like jumps over a freaking medieval parapet.
All right, so time out. So here's where the magic doesn't meet reality for the Scrambler 1200. It is a very good bike. It can scramble. As far as, the question about which scramblers are legitimate, I would say that 90% of the footage in that film was really cool, and you could actually see, even some of the chase scenes, the scramblers doing their thing.
Yeah.
The jumping scene in Morocco specifically, however, there were a bunch of leaked photos where they actually made the jump with, I believe it was a KTM 350 dirt bike, and they tried to put like Triumph bodywork on it because the Scrambler does have some limitations. At some point, it's still a 500-pound motorcycle that can only do so much.
The jump in that movie is absolutely absurd.
And they also they had to CG the stairs back in because they put quarter-inch or plywood over it so they could actually jump it. And there's a ramp, so there's a lot of movie magic.
Yeah, movie magic. But I do appreciate that. Like you said, it was a little overblown in the movie. But I appreciate that the bike can back it up. I would like to pivot quickly to the Street Scrambler, however, which is the smaller Scrambler from Triumph, which, in my opinion and understanding, is a fine motorcycle, but not an off-road bike.
So I was at the launch for that one as well, and that was in Spain, and they were introducing the Street Cup, and which was kind of like the predecessor to what became the more expensive Thruxton.
And just to pause really quick, Spurge. What we're talking about is the Triumph Street Twin, which is the 900cc
replacement to the original Bonneville line.
Right. And it's the sort of smaller engine and more entry-level bikes. And what Triumph did essentially is the same thing with the Street Twin that we mentioned that BMW did with the R9T, where there was the original bike, and then there was like a sporty one that was kind of cafe racery, and then there was a scrambler one that was kind of scramblery, right?
Yes. And actually, this is going to tie into something else. So let's back up one step further because we're having history hour now. The original bikes were a combination of 790 and 865 cc air-cooled parallel twins, and that ran up until about 2008, 2009-ish. Then things started to change. The engines kind of carried over. They made a couple of different versions using that engine still, and then it was in like 2000 and, I don't know, 15, 16.
14, 15 maybe, yeah.
That's when they came out with a whole new engine platform, which was the new 900s. That's when the Thruxton became a big 1200cc bike. It's when the Street Cup replaced what was or what had been the original Thruxton, and then the original 865 Scrambler became what was known as the Street Scrambler 900. But then they also, much like they did with the Thruxton, there was a bigger Scrambler, which is the one that we were all just gushing about.
Good job, Spurgeon.
Yeah, did everybody follow that?
Yeah, that was impressive.
Yeah. So then what I would say is that the Street Scrambler was actually a very fun motorcycle to ride on the street. It had different,
which,
to
be fair,
gearing.
Is what the name suggests.
But then it's also saying Scrambler.
They let us ride it off road. It was very limiting off road. I mean, I think it was like 5 inches of suspension travel, something like that. It was very limiting. On
the topic of history lessons, though, like the original name Scrambler, like all they did to differentiate it from a street bike, say take the old Honda 160, was they put high pipes on it and they put knobby tires on it, and suddenly it was supposed to be suitable for off-road riding. So like, some of these bikes aren't that far off from what the original concept was for a quote-unquote scrambler.
That's very true. And even bikes that people raced back in the day, Ari and I did a bunch of research in our Motorcyclist magazine days. And I remember, Ari, do you remember that photo that we found from some article from Motorcyclist in the 60s or 70s, I think. And it was a dude on a Triumph Twin. It was I think a 650 twin, or it might've been a BSA twin. And he's like 5 feet in the air.
Yeah.
On knobby tires on a BSA or a Triumph Twin with like work boots and an open face helmet.
That probably weighed like 500 pounds.
Oh, and it's just punishing to think about that dude landing. But I mean, literally that was the thing, like just to Ari's point, that was where the whole like desert sled and scrambler thing came from, was people just sort of like hopping up these bikes and being like, we're going to take them off road. And they didn't do a modern Triumph Scrambler 1200 treatment where they put massive shocks on it with cartridges and huge,
those didn't exist. It
was just sort of like, here we go. I guess we got knobbies on the Triumph, and now I'm going to boost it off this jump.
It's funny. The new Scrambler 1200 or the new Scrambler 1200 has a set of Olin's rear shocks on it that are as long as my arm.
Yeah,
totally.
13 inches long.
So very, very. As long as we're going down rabbit holes here, There's a Common Tread article, and this is a shameless plug. I was out drinking with Brett. Brett Walling is our boss. So if you're listening to this, all three of us report into Brett Walling. We were out drinking the one night, and we ended up in this all-night bookstore at like 1 o'clock in the morning. And I found a Popular Mechanic magazine from 1966, and on the cover was Steve McQueen, and he reviews like 5 or 6 different scramblers of the era. So I wrote a Common Tread article about it. So if you want to see exactly what we're talking about, you can go to Common Tread, and the article is titled "How Good Were the Original Scramblers? Steve McQueen Tests the Best of 1966."
Wow, sounds like a great piece.
It was a really interesting magazine find to have him go, and all of these bikes were just built around parts. They didn't exist in a catalog. You had to buy them and just swap everything out. So it was pretty
awesome.
Cool. Yeah,
very cool. So any other? I feel like because we've really covered a lot of scramblers at this point. Any other scramblers that we feel like are worth talking about?
I feel like
Royal Enfield Himalayan.
What's wrong with the Himalayan?
Yeah.
What's wrong? Like, I don't have enough time in the podcast.
You broke your freaking leg on it. You think it sucks. I rode the wheels off it, and it's awesome.
It's not.
You're too big for a Himalayan. That's all.
The
Himalayan is a brilliant motor. Yeah, the brakes aren't great, but like it doesn't go very fast, so the brakes don't have to be great.
Right.
As an off-road bike, I think it's great, and I recommend it to folks all the time because it's got a tractor of an engine. It's got a low seat.
Are they folks that you don't like? Are there people that you're trying to like kill that you're trying to recommend this bike to?
New riders who are interested in not spending a lot of money in trundling along off-road, perhaps with some luggage.
Right. And people always want we had someone, Ari, I don't remember who was that asked us like, oh, like my son wants to get a bike and we want to do adventure kind of stuff like dirt roads. He's thinking about getting a Ducati Scrambler or like a desert sled or something, but he's like, he just got his license or he's never ridden before or something. And we're like, nah, don't
10
get
grand on one of those.
Yeah, don't get an 800cc Ducati. Like that's gonna be a little too much tuna. Whereas you nice low seat height in the Himalayan, you like trundle along. It's a handsome little.
I don't necessarily want to own one, but it's definitely got. There's a lot of people that it's very appropriate for. I think it's a darling little machine.
I agree. Anyway, Spurgeon,
2 out of 3. Outvoted Spurgeon.
No, but hang on. Time out.
You want to talk about its looks? It looks great.
Let's just bring this back to what the episode is going to be about. Because the marketing campaign for the Himalayan was like taking it to a motocross track, jumping it, doing all this crazy with it. So
what?
As
jumping it.
Yeah, no. as far as like, if we're going to tie this back into the episode of imposter motorcycles, all I'm saying is I think Royal Enfield overpromised and under-delivered a little bit based on their marketing campaign. And we can get into other manufacturers.
He's starting to put the finger up.
For those of you just listening and not watching, I am waving my finger around.
He's swinging his finger around.
Let's get into some of these other bikes that tie into the imposter thing. But before we do that, let's just take a quick break and get in a word from our sponsor, Motul, before we start waving our fingers around all excited and willy-nilly like.
Excellent idea.
All right, so we're back. In the brief little hiatus that we had, we're all still excitedly talking about this. So let's go ahead, Zach. You've got some other scramblers. We're going to wrap up scramblers because there's other models that we want to get into. But what other
crappy bikes to discuss?
Well, I guess I just feel like I think that I would like to, because we've done a pretty comprehensive exploration of the scrambler genre at this point, I think, and hopefully Emil Sundqvist from Sweden is happy with what we've talked about. And I think just to tie off a couple other ones here, because we talked about like the Triumph 1200, legit and pretty cool. Ducati Desert Sled, also pretty legit and pretty cool. Scrambler 62 from Ducati, a little less so, right? 400cc engine, low seat height. It's not going to be quite as capable. A lot of this stuff you can, see, read between the lines and see it on the spec sheet. But do you guys remember the Moto Guzzi Scrambler?
Oh, was it there was V7 based?
Yeah, it was like a V7.
Well, considering the V7 itself isn't even a very good motorcycle, I imagine if you try and take it off road, then
I'm going to look it up. I didn't do this in my research because it just popped into my head when we were talking about it.
Front forks are like the diameter of a quarter.
Yeah, they're like 35 or 37 millimeter, and that's the bike that stalls all the time.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Do you want some time to look this up? Because I have another one we could talk about with scramblers.
Stornello. V7 Stornello Scrambler. And I remember just seeing the oil pan.
Yeah.
Dangerously close to the ground.
The Stelvio, for that matter. That was that era of like everyone coming out with a full-bore ADV bike that were really just sport tourers that were supposed to look like they went off-road. Like the original Triumph Explorer, didn't we like we punched a hole in the sump of that thing, jumping it.
Yeah, and we mangled the front
wheel. So like it almost didn't make it out of the woods. But
so I think like the V7 Stornello is another one that sort of is just not. If you think it's a scrambler, it is just not a scrambler. But on the topic of the V7 Stornello, the Triumph Street Scrambler, the BMW R9T Scrambler, the Ducati Scrambler 62 or base Scrambler, or whatever. It's not that they're bad motorcycles. I mean, the Moto Guzzi is kind of a bad motorcycle, but otherwise, it's not that they're outright bad and you shouldn't own them. Just know that they're not quote unquote actual scrambler or like actually capable off-road in the same way.
Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the marketing.
Exactly. Don't believe the sort of like leather saddlebags from the brochure and think like, I can go and roll my own cigarettes in the desert.
The last one that I have before we move on from the whole Scrambler thing was a more recent one, and it kind of ties in with more of a premium play the way the Triumph did with the Scrambler 1200. And it gets back more into how the bike was marketed from the OEM versus how it performed in real life. And that was the original release of the Indian FTR 1200 Rally. Because like when they phenomenal motorcycle, but when they put out the marketing, it was jumping and off-road racing and all this crazy stuff, and it's a
Ducati monster.
It had a hard time living up to that. And then, in fairness, now that they have the 17-inch wheel version, love it, great bike. But it just the whole like we're gonna call this a rally left a lot to be desired.
That was basically a hype too. I'm glad you called that out. That's a good one. Well. To pivot a little bit, go ahead, Derry.
Other categories. I think there's lots of other segments of motorcycling that we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, 100%. And this is sort of a transition, but Spurgeon was mentioning how like the marketing, just talking about marketing and I don't actually, to be fair, remember the whole Himalayan thing where they would like jump in it. I don't recall that, but I do remember
the videos and send it to you.
I do remember the Ducati Multistrada Enduro 1260. Promo video being at a motocross track, and then Ari, I think you went to Sardinia and rode it, and then you came home and said, I don't think that was such a good idea.
It was a little too heavy and a little too soft to really do anything particularly aggressive.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where like,
well, I think that's a good point. Like, that's a good point with just some of these OEMs in general, right? Like I just got back from the Desert X launch, and the Desert X was a really solid motorcycle, but like, they put a professional rider on it that the bike is tuned for them, and they take it to a motocross track and it looks amazing. And when the average rider, like me, takes it around, you're like, I don't know if I would want to take this, as aggressively as, maybe the Italian racer that they got to ride.
Right. The MXGP rider did. Yeah, that's fair. Well, how about a hard pivot? Guest honors, Ari. What's another bike on your list from perhaps from a different category that?
So we're talking about a bike that looks the part but does not live up to the expectation.
Sure, or that doesn't look fast but is, or so whatever, whatever you want.
Doesn't look fast, it is. I really feel like in this overall this conversation, the Harley Street 500 and 750 needs to be discussed as a motorcycle that hopefully no one listening has any experience with, because it is a truly awful motorcycle, a series of motorcycles with some of the worst brakes. They're dangerous. The brakes are terrible. Like you can
didn't work.
Drag your freaking shoes and you're going to slow down faster than pulling the lever. So yeah, I don't even know what the status of those models are anymore. I just remember when they came out, they were marketing them as Harleys. They were trying to sell them to people as an affordable Harley because all the other Harleys are whatever $10,000 or $12,000 or $25,000, and they just weren't. It was a Harley in tank badging only, and other than that, it was just a really miserable little motorcycle.
And I think
so what do you think? What do you think?
That's like cruisers. Like so basically we're kind of pivoting to like they were marketing as like an entry level cruiser.
Yeah. So like the bar is pretty low anyway. Well, to be a cruiser as far as what they're supposed to do, right? Like they're not supposed to be fast or corner or brake well. Right. And then those bikes did all of those things so much more poorly than anyone could have ever expected.
So I guess that's my question: is like, what was if they're imposter motorcycles in your mind? Like, what were they pretending to be that they failed? Like literally just a base bike, just a motorcycle that works, and
pretending to be adequate is what they were trying to do. Pretending to be worth spending your money on so that you could go out and enjoy yourself as opposed to putting your life at risk.
Well, they were pretending to be an entry-level cruiser. And in reality, like if you're looking for a solid entry-level cruiser, you're better off with a Rebel 500 or a Versi or the Kawasaki
Vulcan.
Vulcan S.
Yep.
Like
Yep.
there were
100%.
better middleweight entry level cruisers out there, and I think Harley Davidson was, trying to, phone it in a little bit. Now,
I understand what they were trying to do, which is the same thing that Yamaha was trying to do with the XSR Scrambler. Like they're trying to appeal to somebody, but they're just unfortunately selling them a product that isn't really appropriate.
Right.
So as long as we're talking about cruisers for 1 second, I think it bears mention to talk about the Yamaha Star Venture and Eluder, which was positioning itself as a big competitor to Harley Davidson and Indian, with a bike that really didn't live up to the hype, both in engine as well as stature and performance. Right. It was overpriced. It was like $25,000, and that was another bike that spent a lot of time sitting on showroom floors.
And so people didn't like it, sure, but again, what did they say that it did that it didn't do?
It just I guess from the standpoint of like it wasn't as good as the competition. It didn't have the same performance as the competition.
That's a big mistake when a company comes out with a product that's supposed to compete directly, like we talked about the R9T, and it doesn't.
You mean the R18?
Yeah, the R18. The R9T, as we've discussed, is a bike we like. But yeah, when you actually paint a target on another model from another manufacturer and say that's what we're going after, and then you build a bike that doesn't quite meet up in any way, that's a big miss.
So, yeah, one thing I remember about that Yamaha. Eluder was the bagger, and then it was like the transcontinental or something like that was the big like top box touring bike, and it was basically supposed to be a huge V twin that was like a Harley except from Yamaha. And one thing I remember about it was that it came out like right before Honda dropped the new Goldwing.
Yeah, I remember the timing was really unfortunate for that model.
It was really unfortunate because anyone who was sort of like winding up to potentially buy a Japanese like long distance bike, and then Honda revamped the Goldwing, and everyone was like, "Wow, yup." And the new Goldwing's not perfect, but
yeah, it's on my list.
Is it interesting?
Yeah.
Well, well, then take it away.
Yeah. Before we move on, why is the Goldwing?
Yeah,
on the list?
I'm curious how the Goldwing's an imposter bike to you.
I mean, it's an extreme. I'm being extreme about it, and being highly critical of the Goldwing. But when the Goldwing has historically always been just this intercontinental tourer, and suddenly they made it smaller with a much smaller gas tank. Like you can't even go 200 miles in that thing, and then it's got luggage that you can't actually put you and your passenger's helmet in. Like
they did fix that. To be fair,
that's on the latest they did, but they haven't done anything about the fact that it only goes about 180 to 190 miles between fill-ups.
You ran out of gas eventually over 200 miles, didn't you? When we did that video, remember? And you ran it actually all the way out of gas, wasn't it? Like was it under 200?
Yeah. No. I don't remember what it was in that particular instance when I ran out of gas intentionally, but when you're riding the thing and you actually fill it up when it tells you to fill it up, you're not going that far. It's still a great motorcycle. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I enjoy riding that bike a lot, and I think it's very capable. But based on what the Goldwing has historically been, and it's totally fair for Honda to want to pivot and change what that bike's objectives are, but it does feel like, historically people expect it to be this ultimate touring rig, and it might not be ideal for that.
Yeah, it does need a bigger gas tank.
Yeah.
There's no two ways about that.
What motorcycle doesn't, right? Maybe a GSA.
Yeah, exactly. So I've got a bike that's on my list that's just taking a slightly different direction, but it is sort of a cruiser, and that's the Yamaha VMAX. Can you guess why I think the VMAX is kind of an imposter?
Because it kicks ass.
Yeah, and it looks kind of dumpy, doesn't it? Like
freaking smokes the tire in third gear.
If you don't know what a VMAX is, it would be easy to see one go by or see one parked and be like, "Oh, that's like looks like someone's uncle's Honda
ugly,
Magna from
like
it doesn't.
Someone pieced it together.
Yeah.
Exactly. It looks like a sort of like 1985 to 1995 generic Japanese cruiser that is just kind of a pud, and like no one cared, like a guy, whatever. It's like it was languishing behind someone's barn, so we dragged it out because it didn't have any money. And then if you ride one, it is one of the more unique motorcycling experiences.
They're ripping fast. They don't turn well, they don't slow down well, but boy, do they accelerate.
Yeah, you need to make sure that wherever you're pointed when you open the throttle is definitely where you want to go. It's sort of like a jump to hyperspace. You can't really.
That's a great example, though. It's a bike that it defies expectations.
Yeah, I think so. And I often think that when I especially kept coming back in my mind when I was brainstorming ideas for this episode about, bikes that don't look the part. And I often, when I think about it, I often look at VMAXs and I think like, what a just a Ford Taurus station wagon of a motorcycle it looks like, you know? It just looks so bland. And the only reason...
Unless you know what you're looking at.
Exactly. But that's the only reason that you would ever know to look at a VMAX and be like, whoa, cool, is if you know that you're looking at a VMAX. It shares no features with any other bike that is interesting in a straight line. Agreed?
Yeah.
Aesthetically. Yeah. Which I just think is fascinating.
Well, that's kind of like, what was the Honda Magna was like that too, to a certain extent.
It was
like
also a V4.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like some
V4,
of those mid 80s Hondas. I mean, like they looked like a generic Shadow for the most part, but it was, you know, they're got a hopped up little hot rod engine in them.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I suppose none of them more so than Mr. VMAX. But I think that's a really interesting bike to call out because it just like looks so plain.
Well, in the same category, I think the CTX family from Honda is similar. Like they're pretty underwhelming in appearance. They kind of look like these long, low scooterish machines, but having ridden them, as with most Hondas, they just work really well. And the engine platform, even on the 700, but especially in the 1300, is pretty exhilarating.
You're not talking. Wait. I'm thinking of what was the inline 6 that they did? Wasn't that CTX too?
No, that's a CBX.
CBX. Okay.
Yeah, you're thinking of the classic, but they also did a little bit more of a hot rod, a VMAX competitor based on the Goldwing engine. Was that the Valkyrie?
Yes, the Valkyrie.
Valkyrie, which is also pretty fun because it's
also
full
pretty
tire
fun.
like a mofo.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm talking about they're not quite recumbent. Honestly, if you were cross shopping the CTX 700, you would be cross shopping with like a Bergman. Like the aesthetic is very much kind of scooter cruiser-ish.
Yeah, and I
That's
did
the parallel twin, right? The CTX.
The 700. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
The CTX 700 uses the same engine as the NC.
NC, but
You're talking. So, Ari, are you talking about the older one, the V twin?
The CTX, I believe, is a transverse V. Is that correct?
You're talking about the 1300.
Correct.
That's the
okay.
ST1300 V4. Yeah, which is shaft drive, I believe. And that bike I actually did see on a list of like worst motorcycles when I was doing research for this article, and this podcast. I remember thinking, "What worst motorcycle?" Like I agree with you, Ari. Like if you look at it, you sort of think like, "Oh, whatever. That's just such a forgettable bike." But really, it was pretty charismatic, and it worked pretty well as a sport tourer.
Yeah, they're fun. I mean, I wouldn't want to own one necessarily, but if I met someone who did own one, I'd be like, you've got more than people think you have.
Yeah, exactly. Got a little bit of a sleeper. Yeah. So were there any sleepers in your list, Spurge?
I did not really focus on any. I'm looking at my list right now. I don't have any sleepers on my list. I have some that are more on the classic / sporty side of things. Again, no sleepers, but the one that kind of stuck out to me. Because there was a whole racing series that revolved around it, and in stock form, it was nothing impressive. Any guesses?
I like the hint. Can you give us one more hint? I don't know if that's enough for me.
You rode one. You raced one.
Well, again, I don't know if that's enough of a hint.
We've raced a lot of weird things.
Yes, but there's an entire the original Thruxton.
Thruxton.
Great track bike.
Much fun. The original Thruxton.
They're super fun.
But when they're hopped up, when you get 80 horsepower out of them, when you put a suspension on them,
when you're on a cheater bike at Barber, they're great.
Exactly. So I think so. The bike in its stock form is the original generation Thruxton, which was introduced in 2006 with the 865 air-cooled engine that we were talking about earlier from Triumph. And
right.
For those of you that aren't familiar, it looks like a vintage cafe racer, and it really did usher in that whole era of like race replica vintage cafe, production bikes. Yep. And in stock form, the brakes weren't good, the suspension wasn't great, the engine was lethargic. It was uncomfortable to ride. Like it was just a weird bike. And I'm saying it as someone that really liked the looks and the feel and the vibe of that motorcycle, but practicality-wise, it didn't measure up to what you expected. So what people ended up doing was, and there was a company in South Bay area of Los Angeles, it was called South Bay Triumph, and there was I forget Matt's last name. Matt was the owner there, and they were getting like 80 to 95 horsepower out of these air-cooled. I mean, they were almost doubling the horsepower of the stock engines. And then there was a whole Thruxton series where they were racing with stock engines, but then they were allowed to put,
different cams.
Yeah, all that stuff.
Yep.
So there were so many different variations that you could make that bike into what it looked like, but in stock form, it didn't really measure up.
Yeah. Right. Ari raced the Thruxton also at some point. Did you know that, Spurgeon?
That's why I said both of you have raced them.
Oh, both of you.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I knew you had both. I got to ride one. There was at Vintage Week in Barber. There was a Triumph event down there in 2013, I want to say, and I got to ride one on the track down there, and that was actually my first track day.
We were there that year.
Yeah.
We probably
That was
were
the
like
year
ships in the night.
rode up. We rode up from,
but you were there, and you were actually raced in the series though, right?
Yes.
I stayed after the race was over, and then Triumph let us go out on the bikes that were there.
But that's what I mean. We probably we may have stayed at the same hotel. Who knows? Yeah, I raced in the actual series and got my actual ass handed to me by Jason himself.
There was a Daytona 200 winner at the track.
But yeah, that's a decent call out there, you know. And I mean, the Thruxton, not unlike maybe the R7 that Ari's working on with Yoshimura, you know, like not good in stock form, not a true out and out track bike in stock form, but like kind of fun if you have it up.
Yeah.
So
I've got one more sleeper.
Go for it.
Yeah.
The old Suzuki Gladius, if y'all can remember that one.
Oh yeah, okay.
It's, by any other name, an SV650.
Exactly. So in 2000, I think it was 6, they decided to give it basically beat it with the ugly stick, as far as I could tell, and just give it all this like swoopy, weird bodywork that was supposed to be like European dance club inspired or something. It was really, they took what had been just a solid boilerplate, terrific motorcycle since 1999, and they just made it hideous, and they made it so. I don't know. It became like a statement, a styling statement to ride one. But underneath the bones,
the handlebar was chrome. It was terrible.
All just. It was in the. I think the paint option was like pearl white and pearl blue. Like it was very unfortunate.
And the name means tiny sword.
Something like that. Yeah, it's just everything about it's unfortunate. But the bike itself, the underpinning, the bones are still the same SV650 we all knew and loved. And it's, at that point, I think it had ABS. It was fuel injected. It was a dual spark head. Really solid motorcycle. It was just, you had to not look at it.
And how many times have all of us showed up at a track day and just watched people on SV650s having a hoot of a time out there? Like a great sleeper bike just in general is the SV650. So much more capable in so many different ways that I think Suzuki ever probably imagined for that motorcycle.
Absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead.
That's a great call out. That's a great call out. I love because the Gladius is for so many people was so shameful. But like I remember we did a test at Motorcyclist years ago of like sort of middleweight twins, and the Gladius was the bike. It was before they revamped it and called it SV again, and that was the total upshot was like it's
still
actually really nice
even after all these years.
Yeah, exactly. It's still good under there. You just gotta sort of like you look under its little hunchback of.
Love it for its soul, not its
looks. What other? So we're a little over an hour in at this point. What other imposters are there? Because we've talked about some sporty stuff. We've talked about some scramblery stuff. We've talked about some cruiser stuff.
I've got still got quite a list here. But guest honors here. You got something else for us?
I mean, I've got one that's like, I feel bad that I keep offering up these bikes that I just feel are terrible because I know someone out there owns one, and so I just hate the idea of being like, "Hey, your bike sucks." But
we talked about that. We talked about that in pre-production, where it's like these bikes are still like I love the original Thruxton. Like,
not this
next
one. I've got Spurgeon.
Ari's not talking about imposter bikes so much. It's just bikes he doesn't like.
Motorcycles that shouldn't have been created. The Suzuki GSX 250R is a genuinely bad motorcycle. It is still being offered by Suzuki for like $4,600. It's the parallel twin that weighs like 440 pounds and makes 19 horsepower.
Who would buy that motorcycle for $4,600 over a Ninja 400 or a Z400?
A CBR 300?
I agree, but there are people out there who are just like, I want a Gixxer, and they go in. I had a friend in high school who had a GSX 600F, I think it was.
That's on my list. It's on my list.
Yeah. And he was so disappointed. I remember like he brought it home and he was all excited. And I'm like, ooh, you got the F? He's like, yeah, what do you mean? I'm like, that's like the parallel twin that makes 45 horsepower. And he's like, no, it's not. And he traded in like a week later. He was so disappointed. Because he didn't know any better. And that's what I'm afraid the 250 will do for people too. They're like, oh, well, Ninja 400s are cool, but this one's from Suzuki. It's a GSXR, right?
So you're talking about the GSX 500F.
No.
Right? Isn't that the parallel twin?
Yeah, I don't know. Was there a 600F?
He's talking about the...
The 600F was the Katana. The GSX 600F was the Katana.
was an air-cooled... inline four.
It was an air-cooled inline four. That's what I'm saying. The
Correct.
500 was I think was a P-twin. The one that I'm talking about.
That was just a GS500. They never had a
GS500.
GSX
Okay.
of that.
The one
And
that
they
I'm talking
did put
about is
bodywork
that,
on that and make it horrendously ugly as
Yeah.
well.
But I remember I was working at the shop in Tennessee, and a customer traded in a GSX 600F Katana, and I
Yeah.
remember being like, I can't wait to go ride this thing. This is going to be great. And I got out on the highway, and I was like, what a turd. Like, I mean, just no power. I think they claimed at the time it was like 80 horsepower, and it was not.
I think I need
So
to clarify the model that I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I think what you're thinking of, Ari,
It looks like a GSXR. It's the
Yeah.
It's a 650F. GSX 650F.
That was still
GSX
that was still an inline four though. That one came later.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it did, and it probably was the Katana engine. But what am I? Yeah, now I'm struggling. This is in high
well,
school. This is almost 20 years ago at this point.
That was the
Oh,
Katana.
you're wondering what bike your friend had in high school. I bet he had the GSX 500F or whatever that was.
Because
it was
they
the
put more
GS500.
modern. It was the GS500 that they put more modern bodywork on.
Yeah, and it was
Gotcha.
like kind
and
of
it was
weird
still
looking.
from the 80s.
Yes, exactly. And
Yeah.
that engine, the Suzuki GS500, not a bad bike. Actually, kind of a polite little, sort of like mid-sized, small beginner bike, whatever. Like kind of a not bad in general. But when you dress it up as a sport bike,
Correct.
it was just really
for
sad.
For clarification for the audience, I am referring to the GS500F, which, as Zach is describing, is basically an ancient drivetrain and engine that they doctored up with modern GSXR-looking bodywork, and it was a disappointment to my friend David Foster.
And the one that
And-
I'm talking about is the GSX 600 Katana, which is a 600
Can of tuna.
And it was an air-cooled inline four that
Yeah.
looked like the regular
What-
GSXR
It
600.
almost, yeah.
Yeah, did it look like a GSXR?
It looked close
Not
enough
quite.
if you were
Not
if you
to a
were
trained eye.
unsuspecting. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
to an unsuspecting eye. And while we're throwing muck at Suzuki, I would like to point out that the
V-Strom?
GSX
No.
S250R
Correct.
or GSX
GSXX
250R
250R, yeah.
is the little 250 parallel twin that, as Ari said, is still sold or was still sold up till recently. And it's basically a GW 250, which is like the Taiwanese police bike. It is a terrible alternative to a CBR 300 or Ninja 400 or something like that. It's
It's
like
the worst option in the category by a
it
long
really
shot.
is. And it's not gonna it's unlikely to break. We're not saying it's like literally poorly made. It was just poorly conceived.
There's better
Ill-conceived
options
and-
out there.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
not
All
not good,
other
not
all
good.
other options.
Yeah.
So to throw some muck at someone other than Suzuki or a company other than Suzuki at this point, how do you guys feel about the Repsol livery Honda CBR 250? Would you say that's a bit of an imposter bike, maybe?
People
Sure.
loved it. I mean, they
Sure.
they liked the
Lovable.
idea of having something that looked fast, but didn't go fast.
How about the simple fact
is
that
what we're
it's
talking
called,
about.
Yeah.
that it's called a CBR and yet it was modeled after a VFR?
Yeah, you mean the
And then
styling.
and then they put Repsol bodywork on it. So like it looks like a mini VFR and then it's labeled a CBR. So like it's a confused bike to
That's
begin
the
with.
one-
A
that's-
genuinely great motorcycle.
That's the one
Yes.
that they made it look like the VFR 1200, right?
correct.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
With that sort of triangular, or not triangular, but angular headlight.
Yep.
And it didn't really look like CBR. And then when they made the CBR 300, they doctored the aesthetic to look more like
To
a
look
CBR,
more like the CBR
family.
600 and 1000 that have been
Right,
updated.
which was smart. But in as Ari points out, in the CBR 250 era, when it kind of looked like a VFR, that was when they had
had
Repsol
a
bodywork
Repsol
on it.
option.
So they put like MotoGP paint
Had the
on
orange wheels.
a confused little motorcycle.
Yeah.
And what I will tell you though is, having worked at the dealership during that point in time, the Repsol 250s sold like 3-1 over the
Really?
non-Repsol
Okay.
250s.
Well, I mean, and as Ari said, as long as you know what you're getting,
Yeah.
as long as you weren't expecting it to be fast, a brilliant little motorcycle, great little bike. But it's just funny to have MotoGP paint on a bike that makes 20. How much horsepower did it make stock? 22?
23 and a half.
Yeah.
Well, as long as we're
Very-
talking about
very little.
As long as we're talking about Honda for 1 second, I want to talk to about a bike that I know our non-podcast producer Spencer Robert really likes, the 300 Rally.
That's on my list as well.
So the 300 Rally, for those of you that aren't familiar,
smart.
it looks like a dirt bike. It's called a rally. It's got like 9.5 inches of suspension travel.
It doesn't just look like a dirt bike. It looks like a rally bike that's meant to go 100 miles an hour across the desert.
Yeah, and
it doesn't even go 100 miles an hour.
Exactly. What they don't tell you is it doesn't go very fast. The engine takes a while to get up to 70 miles an hour. And while it does have 9 point whatever inches of travel, what they don't tell you is that you use 7 inches of travel just sitting on top of it. So.
Yes, especially if you're larger than the average bear, like Spurgeon Dunbar.
Yeah.
But that's a great. That bike was not on my list. That's a great call out though, because that is a bike that you could definitely see someone going into a dealership and being like, oh it's like a Tenere 700 except smaller.
Yeah, I'm gonna be wheeling through whoops and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And then you get on an on ramp and punch it, and it goes.
Yeah, or try and lift the front wheel at any point off road, and it's just like, nope, sorry.
Yeah.
Do it again, Zach. Do it again. What does it sound like?
My little kitten purr.
That's exactly what it sounds like.
And it is, and again, we said this a number of times now. All things considered, as long as you know what you're getting, it's a good bike.
Great little motorcycle.
Literally, when we went out to get on Adventure Fest, I said to everybody on the team, I was like, "What bike do you want?" Everybody gave their list, and the number one bike on Spencer Roberts' list was a CRF 300 Rally, and that's what he got.
He spent time on that platform.
Yeah. That's interesting call out. So I've got.
Give us one on your list, Zach.
I've got. This is gonna. Well, it's another Honda. Why not? We're throwing shade at Honda now. The modern Super Cub, the one that they just came out with. So, do you guys know the one I mean? It's a sort of retro style round headlight, two-tone paint, beautiful little machine. It's based on key
fob.
It's got a key fob, true. It's based on essentially the Grom. It's Grom engine. I guess the Trail 125.
Yeah, they're all the same engine.
Yeah, but it's the auto clutch.
It's the
right?
auto clutch and gearbox from the Trail 125, or more accurately, the Trail 125 is from the Super Cub. But whatever. So no clutch lever, very polite and easy to ride. Here's my beef. Thanks for asking. It's a beautiful retro little thing, and the drivetrain is awesome, and yet to me. The thing with the Super Cub and Honda Cubs over time is that they just sort of like knock the practicality thing out of the park. And the Super Cub looks like this brilliant little scooter thing, but there's no passenger seat. You can't take another person with you. And there's no underseat storage of any kind, really. So in the end, unfortunately, it's like... It's
not very practical.
It's not practical at all. And that just drives me nuts when it's something like the Super Cub. You know, it's like, this is the modern iteration of the thing that has powered Asia for decades, you know? And it just doesn't actually cut the mustard. Like, I even if it was just like a little storage compartment somewhere, I don't know, or a passenger seat option, like, come on, right?
That's what the aftermarket's for.
Yeah, I suppose.
But yeah, it's definitely, it's for a different purpose than the originals.
Yeah. And I think it is lovely. And I had one around for a while, and my wife rode it around, and she thought it was great, and she looked adorable on it. And I mean, it was just, it's awesome in so many ways. I'm so disappointed that because I would never buy one. And because I love scooters, and I think it's probably the most beautiful and like the coolest looking.
Is there one in that line of Hondas that you prefer to it? I mean, you look pretty darn good on that ADV 150 scooter, if I must say so myself.
I would. That's different. That's a whole different.
Yeah. That's not really in the mini moto platform.
I mean, you basically you either get the Trail 125 or the Monkey. Yeah. Those are the kind of family members.
Or the Grom, I guess, right? It's the same kind of thing. But yeah, if I was going to get one of those bikes, I'd probably get a Trail 125, I guess, just because I do have a history with it now.
Yeah, you've got an affinity for them.
I do, but I also appreciate that. While there's no passenger seat, there is a massive luggage rack, and it's sort of like it doesn't promise any amount of it promises some amount of utility, but no real amount of practicality. Whereas the Super Cub, to me, it's like too pretty and not enough practicality. I don't know. That just
it's a valid.
It's someone else's turn.
No. It's a valid. I appreciate you telling us how you feel, Zach, and that we always like that. I want to pivot away from Honda for a second.
Please do.
And, kind of going back to what I was talking about, with the Thruxton, there was the Boxer Cup series, right? So, this is going back to BMW. And one of the bikes that I loved from an aesthetic point of view, but it necessarily didn't deliver on a performance side of things, was the R1200S, which was a fantastic looking bike, great, sporty sport touring bike, but like not something that delivered up to the performance horsepower of even some of the bikes in BMW's, lineup at that time with the K bikes. So that's a bike that I absolutely love the way it looks. But as far as, the performance side of delivering on, probably didn't.
Well, they did do an HP version of that bike.
Yeah, HP2, right?
Which basically just made it a lot more expensive and a little bit faster.
I mean, anytime you try to make my dad has been road racing old BMW Airheads from the 60s and 70s for years now, and he calls his all of his creations the pigs on stilts, because anytime you try to make an opposed twin BMW go fast or lean over, it just doesn't quite work.
Again, it's all about the expectation. What are you trying to use it for, and what was it designed for?
Right. But that is an interesting call out, Spurge, and there probably were some people who thought like, finally a BMW sport bike, and then they bought it and they were like, I wish I hadn't sold my K1300 or whatever, which actually had quite a bit of punch and but the R1200S is a pretty cool looking bike though. It did have the classic BMW cylinders sticking out were cool, and it had undertail exhaust, sort of like a la Ducati 916. It was cool.
It's one that I would still like to own one of these days, to be completely honest with you. Like when I was shopping, when I ended up buying the VFR, I was looking at R1200Ss too. It's just that the R1200S was always a little bit above what my price range was that I was willing to spend, whereas like the Honda VFR was a little bit more within my price range.
More attainable.
Yeah. So but it's still one that, like, if I could find a nice one for an affordable price, I would love to just have one, even just as like a weekend rider to go out and blast around on some backcountry roads. It would be a fun bike to have.
Yeah. All right. What else you got, Ari? I got a couple more.
My list is exhausted. I don't think I spent as much time doing research and brainstorming as you fellas did.
Well, I got one to pitch to you. I'm not sure everyone will agree with, but Livewire.
What don't you like about it?
Yeah, it's hard with expectations because it's kind of a new breed of motorcycle.
Torque that will rip your arms out of their sockets.
Right. So the Livewire is originally the Harley Livewire, now spun off into its own brand, Livewire 1. It is a fully electric 565-pound. Sort of a. How would you classify it? Like a standard?
I would classify it as a cruiser based on the silhouette and where your feet are. Yeah.
No, I mean your feet. It's more sporty. It's more like a Honda CB1000 or something.
Like a naked,
don't you think?
Like a naked sport bike.
Yeah,
maybe I'm still having a hard time divorcing it from the Harley stuff. But
I was impressed with it. We had one, when I was out visiting the two of you recently, I got a chance to ride that one that we had in the shop, and I was really impressed with how it handles.
It accelerates probably faster than anything else that wasn't made to go on the racetrack.
Yeah. So that's the thing that I think is interesting about it. That's why I wanted to bring it up in this list of imposter motorcycles. Not that it's an imposter, but that I think a lot of people would associate it with Harley Davidson, and you don't always associate Harley Davidson with performance, certainly in a straight line, and then also electric motorcycles, which are sort of like, some of them are fast, but most of them are underwhelming, and none of them are as fast as actual fast motorcycles. So I think there's a lot sort of stacked against the Livewire from a perception standpoint, and then if you get on one and you put it in sport mode, as Ari and Spurgeon will attest, and you open the throttle, it boogies,
it rips.
Man.
Yeah,
it is fast.
It's
in
fast
a way that's
enough
really
that
engaging.
you feel it in your stomach and you feel it in your eyeballs, which is really saying something. The only other place you really experience that is on a roller coaster.
Right.
Do you remember the Victory Impulse TT?
The Very rode one, I think. You rode it when it was a Bramo, though.
It was a Bramo. It wasn't a Victory, but yeah, I rode an RR. I rode like a prototype race bike.
Okay, we did a video review on one years ago, back when Victory was still a motorcycle company, and I just remember being really disappointed with it. Right, it had it cost a lot of money. It had all the expensive bits on it, and I remember riding it and being like, I'd rather have an SV650
or a Gladius.
Yeah, or a Gladius. Good call.
Or even a Gladius.
But I will say, when I rode the Livewire, I was like, I wasn't expecting much, and I was very pleased with how it handled itself. It even, I didn't take it on any curvy roads, but a few on ramps and off ramps, and it held the line really nicely.
No, it handles well, yeah.
Yeah, I was really impressed.
Similar to the VMAX. It just offers an amount of performance that's so unexpected, and frankly, so far beyond what most other motorcycles can provide that it really is unique in that sense.
Yeah. And in California, you're at a stoplight and there's any kind of, $300,000 car next to you and you can blow their doors off because they're not expecting you to accelerate that quickly. So
Right. Unless it's a Tesla.
Fair enough. Which there are a lot of around here.
I was on Pacific Coast Highway with a Tesla years ago, and I was not on a particularly fast motorcycle, which made me sad, but it was like a dude. I could tell it was like a dude taking his buddy for a ride in his new Model S. And it was that section of PCH area in Huntington that's near that plant, and it's straight and open, and you can hoss on. You
Everyone
can go up to
hauls
100
ass
miles an hour.
there.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't remember what I was on. I was on something, not slow, but like not fast. It was like an MT-07 or something like that, And I could tell the dudes were going to hoss on it, and I wanted to kind of like race them. And I sort of tried, but that Tesla got small so fast. It looked like a lot of fun. Anyway, one more thing I want to touch on about expectations, and this is going to be, we're going to touch a nerve here, and I think there are going to be some people, some listeners perhaps that are upset that we go on this little rant, but I'm going to try to keep it balanced. But how about the perception that cruisers are comfortable, that you will be comfortable when you get on a Harley Street Glide or even a Kawasaki Vulcan S or that these bikes are the places. These are the recliners of the motorcycling world. This is where you kick back and you relax and you're so comfortable for.
This is why people get so mad at us because we quote unquote hate cruisers, and that's not it. Like a lot of these engines,
We've just ridden other things that are better.
They're just uncomfortable. Like
Correct.
We just want our feet underneath our hips in order to be comfortable, right? Is that like kind of the
Paul Theed, the owner of Racetech, has a motto that says, in reference to suspension, the best you know is the best you've tried. And in my opinion, the folks who have been riding an ultra classic electric glide for 20 years and say it's the most comfortable motorcycle, it's because they have not ridden an RT or a GS or a VFR or any other motorcycle where your feet are under your ass and you can actually protect your spine from getting hammered when you go over bumps.
But the reason I think a lot of people find these bikes to be comfortable is because they can get both feet firmly on the ground because they have an incredibly low seat height.
Okay.
And
That
in
is
their mind, they
very
equate
fair.
that to comfort.
It is comfort as in comfortable, as in they don't feel intimidated. Not
Exactly.
comfort as in my body is relaxed and
I
this is
agree.
a healthy, natural. No, I was
agree.
going to bring that up, and I think that's extremely astute, Spurgeon. Is that it's like they're comfortable and that they feel like they're in control and they're not going to fall over.
especially considering the bikes are huge.
Yeah.
Sometimes, or can be.
Yeah.
That is a very, very smart observation. And I hadn't really put that together in the context of this discussion, but that's a good point. And it bugs me. Ari and I rode baggers from Wyoming to California a few years ago.
With dirt bikes in tow, right?
No,
This is different. This was just supposed to be. This was us just trying to do like a all-American road trip on all-American machines and be like, all right, we're just going to embrace everything that the tradition and the mystique says you're supposed to enjoy about it.
Right, so it was a Harley Street Glide special and an Indian chieftain. No,
It was very forgettable.
whatever the bagger is.
Other than my lower back hurting.
Right, and yeah, we just like suffered, and the wind protect, like there's a lot of buffeting in our helmet, and I think I'm not gonna go on any more of a rant than we already have about how much I dislike them. What I will say is, I would like people to consider that even though the cruisers, baggers, whatever, have this reputation for being comfortable, don't necessarily buy into it.
Don't buy
try
into it.
something else. Try other stuff.
Please try something else.
Yeah.
So I will leave you with this. I had years ago, it was right when the Indian Scout came out, and Lemmy was doing a review on it, and he wanted to go on a road trip. He's like, hey, I need to put some miles on this bike. There's this rally out in Ohio somewhere. Do you want to ride out with me? And I had just got my original Tiger 800. I had just bought it, and I was like, yeah. I'm like, I don't have anything to go out there on other than my adventure bike, and it's kind of like this like cruiser rally in the middle of some field in Ohio. He's like, don't worry about it. Nobody's going to judge you. Come on out. So I was like, okay. I was so comfortable on my adventure bike. And at one point, Lemmy said, do you want to swap? Do you want to try the Scout? And I was like, brand new motorcycle. Looks cool. The engine was phenomenal. The fit and finish, phenomenal. I lasted 15 minutes on the bike, and I was like, can't do it.
Not a soaring bike.
I was just getting my spine slammed because the way you're sitting, you can't leverage your feet at all.
Can't do anything. You can see the bumps coming, and all you can do is kind of grit your teeth and get ready for it.
I literally
just take it.
I flagged him down after it couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 minutes. I was like, we got to swap back. He's like, what do you mean?
He knew what he was doing. He needed a break.
Yeah.
Oh, it was horrible. Yeah.
Well, I couldn't not bring up the sort of like imposter perception, at least of bikes
comfort.
that are
imposters of being comfortable.
Exactly, comfort imposters. Yeah,
I think that's a good place to wrap things up, though, because by this point, like, there's already 150 comments below where people are like, "I can't believe you hate cruisers so much. Why do you guys, keep doing this to yourselves and to us?" So,
yeah. Well, yeah. But to your point, Spurge, like an Indian scout, like if I had if I knew someone, again, I'll borrow a line from Ari Henning in this podcast. Like, I wouldn't necessarily want to own one, but if someone told me, like, yeah, I commute, 5 miles, 15 miles, whatever, and I go down, like, through the burbs and then trot down the highway for a second, and then and I got an Indian Scout, I'd be like, cool, good bike, like, good, if that's what you like, all good, nice low seat height, and yeah, like you said, great engine, good brakes. Good, it's a good bike.
But there was a fire that exploded in a comment section recently about what's the newest Sportster they did come out with, the Nightster?
Nightster.
Yep.
There was like a first look article, and I wrote some comment in the comment section about, like,
you said something like, boo!
No. I was like, it's great to see that Harley produced the 950 engine, right? The engine that was originally slated to be in the Bronx.
That everyone was so excited about.
And I put a comment in there saying, like, well, it's great to see that they built the engine. Hopefully we'll get the Bronx now. And people were like, no, I don't want them to build the Bronx because it's just, people are just, all over Harley Davidson, and it's just people that don't understand the brand that want that motorcycle. I'm like, no.
They don't understand the tradition, the character.
I think that Harley makes really awesome engines. It's if you like low thunderous torque and a good feeling, experience from the get-go for just getting around town, like, awesome. But I don't want to sit with my feet in front of me. I don't want to have my spine pummeled. I'm too old for that. Like, so if you could take that experience of the engine, put some usable brakes and suspension on it, and put my feet underneath me.
Sounds like a recipe for a good motorcycle.
In other words, just take the Livewire chassis and just put a Revolution Max engine in it. Because the Livewire is a good bike. It's got good brakes and good suspension, handles well. It's good. Start to finish.
I'm in the same camp. I hope they bring the Bronx around because that and the Pan America would be two bikes where I'm like, all right, nice. They're doing something that, like, I can get behind.
You know what else Harley did in the Pan America that was great? The turn signal switch. Because after getting on that live wire, where
we're going on quite the Harley rant here, guys.
No, we had one more thing. Cruise, yeah. But anyway, I think that was a good place to end it. Hopefully that was a fun episode for a lot of people. I feel like we on like a nice wide circle. Yeah.
But it was very cathartic, I have to say, because, sometimes you just got to get the stuff off your chest.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully, if nothing else, Emil from Sweden learned about scramblers, and if no one else learned anything, then hey, we served one person.
But I think, again, just to drive it home, as we say goodbye to Mr. Henning, and we jump into the comments section of the podcast, these are not necessarily motorcycles that we didn't like. Some of them were, but for the majority of these, they're great motorcycles for what they are, just not necessarily what they look like they are.
Exactly. Hopefully, it's ridiculous to think that Highside, Lowside is an educational program, but I can't help but say I hope some people learned some stuff today.
They certainly learned a lot about the history of Triumph Twins thanks to one Spurgeon Dunbar.
That's true.
We are the PBS. We are the PBS of motorcycling, folks. All right, okay. Ari, thank you so much for joining us today. We have to move on and do some final housekeeping here with some of the comments from listeners, but you enjoy the rest of your afternoon, my friend.
Guys, thanks for letting me vent. I'll see you later.
Later, man.
As always, it is a pleasure having one Ari Henning on the podcast with us. Is it not, Mr. Quartz?
Nothing but a pleasure. He's good for an anti-Harley rant. Just to be clear, I did want to keep it balanced, and I appreciate the discussion around comfort and what that can mean to certain people. I think we covered it.
Yeah, but it also wasn't anti-Harley. We were talking about cruisers in general. And
that's true.
All
Cruisers
of
in
the
general.
manufacturers across all nations have made them and made their mistakes doing it. So let's move
Also,
on.
For what it's worth, just quickly, we talked about Livewire, which is a Harley product, which is great.
2 thumbs up from this guy.
So,
All right. So Highside, Lowside comment section. The first email came in from Texas Bike Killer. And this was Casey. The email subject was Texas Bike Killer, and the name was Casey. Says, I ride a 1975 Honda Goldwing GL1000, the original Honda Goldwing.
Yeah.
Decently mechanically inclined. He's changed timing belts, spark plugs, boots, final drives, oil, etc. The bike's in pretty good shape, has 40,000 miles on it, lives in Dallas, Texas, rides around over 20 miles an hour on top of what the speed limit is posted at. Good for you, Casey.
I think.
And then just says, while making my way up the speed limit, I prefer to go full throttle until around 1,000 RPM below the red line. In your opinion, can most bikes be ridden this way without fear of catastrophic failure?
So basically, what's the name? Casey? Is that right?
Casey.
So basically, what Casey is saying is Casey likes to accelerate up to speed by like really, giving it the pills. Likes to go up the on ramp and go whap, and really wind it out before.
Wants to let her eat, baby.
Yeah. Rev it up, rev the engine out.
Gasoline is affordable. Just dump it down the throttle.
And Casey wants to know, is it bad to do this to the engine? I think this is a good question. Basically, like, can I rev my bike out and not worry about it exploding? Like, is it bad for it?
I made a mistake earlier. I assumed Casey was a he, but Casey could be a
she.
name.
Yeah.
So yeah, Casey, he or she.
Why I've just been calling Casey.
Yeah.
So the quick answer here, I'll give you a quick answer, and then we'll dive into the longer answer. The quick answer is this is fine. Do that. That's what the bikes are engineered for. That's what the whole team who built that Goldwing engine, they didn't build it to operate below 3,000 RPM and then put a red line at 6,500 or 7,000 and think like, oh, geez, I really hope nobody revs it up that high. It was engineered to do that. And I mean, especially with a Honda, even one from 1975, you could probably run it within 1,000 RPM of red line for an hour and it would be fine.
Not an hour and a half, mind you, Casey. Just an hour.
No, 2 hours, all day, a week, whatever. You probably drain the oil out of it and run it in your red line. It'd be okay. Don't do that.
We're not recommending that.
We're not recommending that. But yes, you can rev the bike up. That's fine. That's what the engine's designed to do. That's the quick answer.
So the slightly longer answer is I get into this with my dad all the time because my dad, Spurgeon Sr., love him to death, likes to ride around like 2,000 RPM, and then if you go to 3,000, the engine might blow up. And unfortunately, he likes to buy motorcycles that have like a 10,000 RPM red line, and when he should really buy a V-twin that has a 5,000 RPM red line. But
right.
He'll be like, man, the fueling's really rough on this thing. I got to get a power commander for it. I got to tweak it. I got to put some throttle block-off plates on it. And I was like, where are you riding this? Like, I get on his V-Strom, for example. I'm like, the thing runs great. And he's like, no, it's stumbling all over the place. I'm like, yeah. At 1,500 RPM, you're having some trouble with it. Like, get it up to 5,000 and just let it sit there all day long, and it's a peach. A peach.
Right.
Peach,
I tell you.
So what I did was I sent him a video that Ari Henning made. And
Right.
Ari Henning made a video that said, is it dangerous? What was the title of the video? Is it too dangerous to run your bike to redline? What's your RPM level? Blah, blah, blah.
Why?
blah.
I think why does your engine have a red line? I think might
There
be
you
the
go.
title of the video. I'm not sure. But anyway, it's a shop manual episode. It is on the YouTubes. You can find it if you Google shop manual Ari Henning redline. I'm sure it will come up. And he dives into specifics of why engines have redline and what's happening in there and all that stuff. And it is it will help you, Casey, if you're listening, and anyone else who's curious about
the official title is "This is Why Your Motorcycle Has a Red Line," and highly recommend that you check that episode out, Casey. My father really loved it. Incredibly educational material. Nothing like a 65-year-old man being told by his son what he needs to do differently in his life. That really great Thanksgiving Day father.
Yeah, that goes over well.
Yeah.
So, just a quick personal note, Casey. I like to do this too. Some people who watch Daily Rider sometimes notice that I accelerate away from a stoplight, and I will I'll kind of punch it in first gear, and then I'll pull in the clutch and I'll go click, click, click up to like fourth gear and then let the clutch out, because I don't necessarily want to go through all the gears revving the bike out. I just want to experiment with the engine and rev it out and like hear it, spin up and then just go whatever 45 or 50 miles an hour.
Basically, Zach only needs 2 gears in a motorcycle, first and sixth, and he's fine. That's all he ever uses.
It depends on the bike, actually. I'm testing this GSXS 1000 GT right now, and the 4th gear and 6th gear are almost identical.
Really?
Like, I don't understand why why we have these close ratio gearboxes with a bike with saddlebags. Like, give me 5th and 6th with a nice high overdrive. This is a whole nother podcast. We got to stay focused.
That with the whole like the FJR 1300 needed a 6th gear thing. No, the 5th gear overdrive gear, it actually worked pretty well. And like,
what'd you say? The FJR?
The FJR 1300 when they had to put a 6th gear on it. Like,
right.
It was fine. Anyway, entirely other podcast. Casey, hopefully that answers your question. Texas biker killer, go ride 20 miles an hour the speed limit. Run that thing up, not to just 1,000 RPM below red line. Hit the red line once or twice. It'll feel good.
Well, now be careful. Yeah, just kidding.
You're telling him to dump the oil out of the motorcycle and run it down the highway for 2 hours. Let's just
don't do that. Next question, comment question came in from Daniel via email. That's right, Daniel. If you're listening, you're up. This email says, "Guten Tag, Spurge und Zack.
Darf ich bitte meine bleichte Spitzen, Daniel?" That's may I sharpen my pencil, please. It's the only thing that I remember from German class. Anyway, continue, Zach.
Daniel says, Daniel bought a 2019 Kawasaki 800 Cafe. So that's a W800 Cafe, I believe. Daniel says, "I know it's not much of a touring bike, but I love riding long distances and taking my bike where I shouldn't, parentheses, off-roading, for example. I took it down to Monterey last May, but quickly realized that it's pretty rough on the tailbone and lower back. I installed upright handlebars and used a sheepskin on the seat to help. Is there anything else that I could potentially do to make the bike more comfortable? Foot peg, seat, DIY stuff." And I feel like I have a very quick answer.
What's your quick answer?
Get a different motorcycle. That's the quick answer.
I disagree.
You disagree?
I'm not going to give you that answer because I am an individual that, for those of you that haven't taken a drink yet this episode, have ridden a Triumph Bonneville across the country multiple times. And it's an enjoyable experience. Hold on one second. I'm drinking for those of you listening.
We got to take a drink, yeah. So Spurge is going to tell you about how you can doctor
and you can
the
do
bike
this.
if you want
so
to.
if it's harsh on your bottom, one, have you adjusted the preload on the suspension? Like, maybe that's where we could start. 2,
Spurgeon's fixes always start with suspension adjustments. If someone's like, the fueling's not very good on my bike, I'm surprised you didn't tell your dad, you just got to, have you adjusted
tweak the
preload
suspension a
on
little bit, Dad.
Exactly.
And the fueling just is like so much better. Once you get the suspension sorted out, the rest of the bike follows if it does not. But I think, for me, a different seat on my Bonneville when I was taking long trips made all the difference in the world. And I know it's not a like for like. I know that Daniel is riding Kawasaki 800, but let's be honest, it's kind of similar.
It's kind of like a Bonneville,
kind of Kawasaki. Kawasaki felt like they kind of dropped the ball by pulling the W650 out of the country just when the Bonneville was coming in. Bonneville took off, and then Kawasaki tried to make up lost ground.
Kawasaki should have called it like the good town. And then everyone would be like, Bonneville. Oh, interesting.
So my point is I think that it is fun to ride a bike and tour with a bike that people aren't expecting. I think that you can challenge yourself in different ways. I do think that a seat would make a big difference. A little windscreen that you can kind of clip onto the handlebars would probably help you out a little bit. And then again, like, I'm not telling you to put a brand new suspension on it, but I'm saying,
jeez.
That's what we have editors for. They're going to bleep it out, and it sounds funny because it's just the bleeping. But I do think that like maybe just adjusting that little preload clicker on the suspension might help it with not being so harsh over bumps over a long period of time. Maybe.
Maybe. I appreciate what you're saying, Daniel. You got your bike, you like it, you don't mind taking it places it's not supposed to go. Fair play. That's fine. It's fine. I'm struggling with the, I don't know, just the sort of like, I've got this like retro cafe racer thing and I take it down dirt roads and like, it's not very comfortable for long distances. What do you think I should do? I just
He's
can't
not
help
riding it down dirt roads. You're putting words in his mouth. Where does he say that?
I am not.
Where does he say that?
I love riding long distances and taking my bike where I shouldn't. Parentheses,
Oh,
off-roading.
I missed that. Yeah, you have the wrong bike, Daniel. Sorry. I changed my answer.
Okay, great.
Trade it in on a KLR 650 from Kawasaki. You'll have a great time.
Thank us later.
Yeah.
All right, moving on in Highside, Lowside. Actually, we don't
That's
really move
it.
on. That's kind of the end. Yeah.
Bam! We finished
So-
it up. We solved 2 problems for 2 specific people today, and now their world is better.
So, friendly reminder: leave a comment below on the on this episode of Highside Lowside, especially if you're watching on YouTube. Our lovely producer Chase goes through almost every single one of them. And episode 11 coming up next is the viewer and listener comment episode. So we're looking for all the juiciest stuff we can get. So please, by all means, give us your best shot, or send us an email to highsidelowside@RevZilla.com.
And as always, please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. And if you haven't already done so, head over to Apple Podcasts where you can leave us a review. It does help us out in the ratings. It helps people find the podcast, and we really do appreciate it. We appreciate it so much that we take the time to send you a T-shirt, much like we're going to do to new mom to baby B, who is the winner for today. Again, just a reminder to old new mom to baby B, shoot us an email to highsidelowside@RevZilla.com with your address and preferred T-shirt size, and we will get one of those sent out to you ASAP.
And just to close it out here, if you submitted a question that we have not answered yet, let me give on behalf of Daniel with his W800 Cafe, let me give a blanket answer to anyone who asked a question about their motorcycle. Just get a new one. Just get a different one. That's my advice. I don't even know what your question is. Just get a different motorcycle.
I don't even know where that came from. You're in a saucy mood today, Mr. Quartz. Man, oh man.
Anyway.
And if anybody wants an Aprilia's 2-stroke scooter, where can they find one of those for sale, Zach?
They can find it for sale at iconicmotorbikesauctions.com.
It's been for sale for months. Zach still hasn't sold his scooter. And with that,
Perhaps years.
let's go ahead and wrap this one up. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode where we talk to you one-on-one via your comments. But for right now, we're going to bid you adieu.
See you, everybody. Buy a new motorcycle.